Today, our guest is an academic who specializes in applied microeconometrics, including labor, well-being, and health economics. In 2022, his book Rigged published, which is based on famous research called Game of Mates with Cameron Murray. Drawing on deep economic research, they showed how powerful networks dominate Australian business and government in last 2 decades. Political favors, grey gifts, and insider deals, cronyism at a national scale. He is a professor of well-being economics at the London School of Economics and has held positions at several universities in Australia. His new book, Minds That Dare: Restoring Western Education with Sienna Baker, just released. Please welcome our guest to discuss what is the university for: truth, conformity, or credentialing. Professor Paul Frijters. How are you, Paul?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Gautam? How's Melbourne?
Oh, it's good. It's good. How long you are not in Australia?
We left Australia at the end of 2016, and we've only been back intermittently, but I still have strong connections to Australia.
Right. So, yeah, Australia is, I guess, pretty much same in last 10 years, though a lot of immigrants and a little bit of chaotic than 10 years ago, but pretty much same. Anyway, so thank you for your time, and we will talk about your new book with Sienna Baker, Minds That Dare: Restoring Western Education. Okay. Now, when I was doing the research and little bit of I know about it, that typical this university education, which is basically became a mass movement after Industrial Revolution. Before that, it was typically elite philosophical phenomena. Are you seeing this AI, our societal intent, complexity of modern life? We are heading back there.
I think it is likely that we are, for the purposes of the original academies, heading back to the same model, yes. So the original academies were very much into educating the thought leaders of tomorrow. They were not into educating the accountants, the financiers, the caretakers, if you like, of empire, right? They were more about educating the thinkers, those who design countries and institutions and who think about how things can be done differently, which is very much an intellectual leadership thing. Now, instead of that, they've started to educate 10 to 50% of the entire cohort of the entire population, which has given it a totally different role. And I think in that different role, it is now failing, and AI will take over a lot of that. But I think that for the role of educating real thinkers who are a community of thinkers and who, to a certain extent, feel custodianship of their countries and for the future of their civilization, that is still needed. That is a bit of an elite occupation. That is true. And I think we'll go back to the model of old in its essence, right? So small academies where people live together, they learn how to become a community, they connect with the communities of thinkers of the past via books and via reflection, and they speak to communities of thinkers in the future as well. So they which is different from university now, right? University now is like a huge snack bar whereby education is seen as something you buy and consume and then you go away and you're happy or not. Whereas that is not how traditional university was. They form you. You become an adult. Well, you don't become an adult in a snack bar. And currently they're all snack bars.
So, as you mentioned, that universities are like quietly abandoning their original mission, which is, independent thinking, deep reasoning, intellectual risk-taking, etc. Isn't it coming from the same understanding that thinkers who guide us for good and noble, and Western society typically build on that? They often are actually a symbolic power. All the time, from my perception, real power belongs to who had wealth or who still has money. You know, that philosophers should sit on the top and they should think and give guidance. I mean, is this the same problem we are in this day and age, and that is actually reflecting here?
Um, I mean, you bring up an interesting question, right? Which is intellectual leadership versus earthly power. Uh, and I agree with you that certainly in today's age, most power is concentrated among the super rich, right? But we've had universities and intellectual leaderships previously in times in which the same was true, right? That was also true in the Middle Ages. That would have been true for many areas of the world for a long, long time. And still, you had academies because those societies also needed the people who could think about reform, who could think about, okay, how we're going to do health differently. What do we think about the spirit realm, the religious realm? And you still had thinkers in that space as well. Certainly in the tradition of the West, those would not have been the super rich themselves. I know that within quite a few of the Indian regions, it was often people from the super rich who took on that sort of spiritual religious role, but that's not the Western background. So in the Western background, that would have been separate from. Now, of course, if you don't have earthly power, then you're not really on top. It is more that you are a little bit separate from, and you can be consulted, and you can try and convince people with arguments. And so that is more the Western tradition of academia, that we're almost looking at a separation of power there, right? Earthly power and intellectual power are separated. And whenever intellectual power really engages with earthly power, usually earthly power wins, right? It's the famous saying, when power meets science, power remains, and science just bends itself, right? It becomes a tool of those who are powerful. And so a scientifically dominated society is not really dominated by science. It's dominated by what is called scientism, so pretend thinking, if you like, right? But underlying is just earthly power which dominates, and the scientists just come up with rationalizations for why everybody should, as it were, follow the super rich and whatever they want, supposedly because of science. So I think our societies are heading back to yeah, the former model of a little bit of an independent intellectual elite, which will have some earthly power, but it should not pretend it's on top, or that it should even have the ambition to tell everybody else what to do. It must be a consultative process. So, academia, in that sense, at best, as it were, tries to convince and tries to think of new ways, but it should always explain itself. It should never put itself into position, oh, just trust me. I thought so much longer about this. You should just follow me because I'm right and you're wrong. That is a terrible way to go. And that is assuming the notion of a king, of a dictator. A king and a dictator can say such things. But intellectuals should always have the humility and the realization that their earthly power is not that great, that they have to convince, they have to explain, they have to bring along. And that is what academia used to be. The first intellectual schools like those of Socrates did that. They talked to people, they questioned, they were part of society, interacted with it, saw themselves as this role of explainers and questioners. And I think we need that again, and we're going back to that. I do, yeah, that's
Hmm.
true.
But as an optimist, I can say at least now all these high IQ people are accumulating wealth. So that is one good thing rather than just you have land and you are just rent seekers, you know. But when they go to the top, whether they're behaving the same way or not, that, time will say, right?
Yes, but of course you're talking about high IQ who are proving themselves in particular industries, right? Um, and that is true, but that too is no different from, as it were, earlier times when there are also places where, as it were, the very smart or the very talented could prove themselves and become part of the super rich. Right now, in some periods of history, that was because you were very good at fighting and warfare. It could have been that, or you were good at intrigue. Um, and there were various other things valued, right? You could have been very, very good at agriculture, and so that allowed you to build a region. But yeah, of course, there is a way up to earthly power.
Right.
Um, but of course, the true intellectual pursuit, to a certain extent, is not really interested in personally having earthly power, right? So Socrates was not very interested in bossing everybody around. He was just not. Now, his disciple Plato was interested in bossing other people around, and he envisaged a society in which people like him are at the top. So
Oh, is
intellectuals
it?
are not free of this, relentless desire for earthly power. That's true. But it's not the original, or I would say the best of academia. The best of academia is wanting to help, right? And there is an intellectual leadership in that. So there's a bit of a megalomania aspect to that thinking. But it is from a place at least where you have to explain, you have to see yourself as not on top.
Mm, mm, okay. So students are treated as customers, not apprentice. You kind of coined these terms. This is kind of coming from a Western countries. You are seeing that way when because I'm Indian origin. So when I say it, it's all about conformity, endure rather than enjoy. And the main thing is it's a generational problem. It's not an individual problem. And everyone is talking about ROI. Okay, doesn't matter what your intention is. Doctor, engineer, ROI is good, so go there. So everyone is talking about this return of investment, not the best thing. How you see this?
Um, Look, those who are thinking in terms of ROI are looking for status. They're looking to acquire as much earthly power as possible. And so the current university is perfect for those people, right? It gives them networks, it gives them the jargon to try and sort of crawl up the ladder of conformity and status. So for people with that mindset, they probably don't see anything wrong with a modern university. And for them, it's a technical problem of how to use AI or be used by AI. It doesn't matter, right? They're chasing the earthly status game. Now, that is fine, but it basically has nothing to do with traditional academia, right? And it to a certain extent is as it were the helper of the king. It is the slave with a particular trick, if you like. It is not a mindset from which what one allows oneself to step outside as much as possible from the current societal system and wonder, well, could we do those things better? And that means you're not thinking of ROI in the pure sort of money status sphere. It means you're thinking of, look, am I truly helping my society? Now, I mean, within Indian society, the Brahmins had a bit of that kind of self-image. And of course, that kind of self-image is a little bit what is also there of the Vedas, the religious aspects of Indian society. And I guess in the West, that part belongs to academia, and academia also grew out of the monastery, so it grew out of religious traditions. And I think what you are describing, this RY mentality, as you call it, this status race, right? It is to a certain extent exactly where these large universities have gone. And I think AI is destroying it. But of course, the status race will remain and will be fought in different ways. But I would say that mentality would probably have no idea what I was talking about when it came to traditional, really old and also I think new academia. That must have sounded like Star Trek or something.
Okay. Another thing you also pointed out that ideological safety and discouraging this heterodox thinking, framing discomfort as harm. I mean, rather like political correctness is everywhere. This is just a little, like a little bypass of it. But in the conversation I was reading, that research institutes are like pushing the value of scholarship that crosses disciplines, but academia pushes interdisciplinary researchers out. So I guess
Mhm.
maybe it's the same thing or not, I don't know, but it sounded me actually same that we are creating silos and losing this holistic approach. Are you actually
Mhm.
talking on that part, or how you see it?
Yes, in my book, I talk about both those things, I would say, right? So, and they're different. So, the first thing you talked about was this safetyism, this notion of nobody should feel discomfort. And nobody feeling discomfort means nobody learns anything of real interest about themselves or society, because it's like a muscle, right? To be able to view yourself openly and honestly, and sort of view other groups openly and honestly and critically means you need to be challenged, right? You yourself need to have that muscle activated and also regularly exercised. Um, and modern universities, they don't allow that. They go along with the sensitivities in that sense, are not really teaching much at all about society or about individual psychology and group processes. And that is also a problem for really teaching people deep skills of leadership and management, right? It just doesn't happen, right? So that is one thing. But in principle, that is a relatively recent phenomenon. 30, 40 years ago, there was still quite a bit of discomfort in the teaching because it was well understood that you need to challenge people and they need to get over their sensitivities, if you like, to be able to have what you might think of as a waiting room of ideas, things that they may be uncomfortable with, but they don't dismiss, they mull over and they think, oh, yeah, there's something to this, there's something, not something to that. But the second thing you talk about, which is this interdisciplinarity, this holistic approach. Well, the holistic approach is definitely where academia came from, right? That's also why we call it philosophy of science, right? There was this notion that you try to be across a lot of different types of knowledge and thinking as an academic, and now it's hyper siloed. But the silos make an economic sense. They come from the RI thinking, right? These are territories. And so territorial animals, which is of course a very, we humans are territorial animals, have led to people looking for little niches. And these little niches grew into whole disciplines. Economics is separate from philosophy, is separate from sociology, and sociology is separate from psychology, and psychology is separate from anthropology, and anthropology is separate from leadership. Even though their essential subject, humans and how they organize, is exactly the same. Right? And so this pretends that they're all very different and they've all got some sort of magical knowledge which no one else has and everybody else should pay attention to. It's just an RI thing, right? That is a means to make more money yourself and to get greater prestige. So that is an outgrowth of the status seeking, and it's metastasized into these knowledge tribes, right? Um, and that is, of course, a huge problem. I mean, it's intellectually dishonest. It is false, right? Because they are looking at the same subject, and one should be not only looking for integration, but one should also, in that sense, have an integrative mindset and not ward off knowledge or insights from other disciplines. But everybody does that and sort of, rediscovers things within their own little discipline. And why? It's again this data-seeking thinking, right? That sort of just gets you more. It's a marketing ploy, if you like. Now that has been going on for maybe 2 centuries, right? That has really become very strong. This disciplinary thinking, and now it's totally dominating. And from the Indian tradition, of course, this is caste-like thinking, right? Castes and subcastes are exactly that. They dominate a particular type of jobs, and they look for little slices of the cake. And there too, that makes it impossible to really think broad and integrative. And it makes sense because, well, each caste is looking out for their own. And as you well know in India, this can be very violent. If you challenge a caste and its usefulness and say, well, no, you're actually part of lots of other things, they'll be very angry and they will kill you if necessary because you are threatening their livelihood. You're threatening their self-esteem, their image of who they are. And the same exactly is true nowadays in these universities. You'll get exactly the same quite violent reaction from the disciplinary tribes. And one of the great advantages of the small academies from which universities once came is that they're too small to be tribal, at least to have sub-tribes, right? So you're just one group. You've got maybe 15, 20 academics. That's it. You haven't got 2,000, so you don't need 100 tribes. No, you can be one basically. And then you can be very integrative and holistic again. So this is a matter of size, right? In small academies are oriented towards educating intellectual leaders of tomorrow, people who sort of help their communities reconstruct them, redesign them, and think of how the world could and perhaps should be, then you automatically go again towards this interdisciplinarity, into this broad thinking, because you need all the best insights in order to do this job. And you're too small to sort of have this fragmentation, this caste forming within. Right. But at the moment, if you like, these disciplines, and just a nice way for them is a caste. That's what they are. And castes are disciplines, are dominant, right? They totally dominate the roost. And as a result, much of what you will read in the journals and this and that is partly for sale, but usually nonsense anyway.
You basically kind of built a prototype to fight against this whole system, which is Academia Libera Mentis or Libera Mentis. How do you pronounce it?
Well, we don't know. It's a Latin phrase, so God knows how they pronounced it so many thousand years ago, right? But Academia Libera Mentis, the Academy of the Free Mind.
Right. Okay. So what exactly you are doing there, or can you please
So,
explain on
I
that?
mean, as you say, we built a prototype. That's a good way to think about it. And so we bought a castle in Belgium, and we refurbished it. We got on with the neighbors. We made student accommodations, and we've been running pilot programs there. So in the last 2 years, we've run two pilot programs of 3 months, followed by 5 to 20 students each, depending on how you look at those things. And we've had lots of volunteers coming, at least 200 students from all over the world have sort of come to us to sort of be part of our journey. And there we've been test driving our, you might call it holistic, broad, we call it an integrated curriculum. Test driving it, refining it. We've also educated whole families, right? So that is a novel thing in a sense. We are also community incubators, right? So we form new thinking communities, including mums and dads and kids. And that is peculiar to our time. And we've been living healthily here. We've got a large garden, we've got an orchard, we do sports in the afternoon, but in the morning we're really quite academic and intellectual. We really reflect on how things work, but we also do some, as it were, of the very classic and recognized knowledge aspects. So we do statistics, we do economics, we go into history, we basically do that sort of broad integrative thinking about all aspects of humanity and society.
So, like the same subject you are teaching to kids and adults?
Yes, so I mean, those kids would, be 18 or above, right? I guess if the kids are particularly smart, one can do 16 and above. But you should hence imagine that, mum, dad, and kids and a couple of families are in a room together, and they bring different things to this table. So when we talk about leadership, for instance, and sort of struggles of leadership, such as making a story to get your kids to eat food that is good for them, right? And parents will have had this struggle, right? That is one leadership thing applied within a family. Then, of course, the kids have the perspective of those being manipulated in order to eat something that's good for them. And the parents have the perspective of, yeah, how do I manipulate you so that you don't just eat chocolate, but you also eat your vegetables, right? And so to a certain extent, there is different knowledge in the room, which actually helps make the learning quite quick if they're willing to sort of engage with this. But why is this important to sort of facilitate? Well, there's really two reasons. One is you're giving whole families permission, as it were, to, as it were, jettisons, let go of a lot of what they previously were taught about society and humanity, and instead adopt their own perspective, right? And so you're giving them a new community, also with other families and other thinkers. So you to a certain extent are freeing them of their previous intellectual embedding and giving them a new knowledge tribe to be part of, right? So you're giving them a set of friends and other families, which they can then also, they can marry, they can set up their businesses, they can basically have a way forward into the future, right? So that's one thing that you're doing. And the second thing that you're doing is you are thinking of knowledge, of having different perspective and aspects to it, right? Such as indeed the parents will have been in jobs and they will have already implemented and already have a lot of sort of habits around the problems that they're trying to solve. And of course, the kids sort of have seen this from the other side. How successful is this? What is not working? And sort of their eyes go open. Oh, this is what leaders do, and this is what our parents have done with us and for us. Right? So there's fast growing understanding there. And it can work very, very quick, right? It's a very, very quick way of educating if you manage to get the right ethos into the room.
Right. So it's basically just the other side of the spectrum. Instead of fragmentation, transactional, and especially with this digitization is getting more and more lonely, it's just the opposite side of the spectrum. Right.
It is, yes. So instead of atomization, we are indeed together, whole families, people live together, they cook for each other, they do sports together. It is still very intellectual, right? We do try to drill down on things, and we do critique each other and peer review each other and have in-depth conversations in which we challenge each other. So that will be familiar to people who were lucky enough to go to universities at the time when that was still normal, maybe 20 years ago, right? Um, but you're right. It is exactly the antidote for these modern mass universities. Yes.
Right. Now, my favorite topic, which is well-being, and as you said, it's being misunderstood. This overprotection, reducing resilience, avoidance, weakening meaning. How we can really inculcate purpose, mastery, and belonging, not this safetyism. I jokingly say that in Australia, let's say, or in India to some extent, if you are coming from a decent family background and if you are not in a serious sports, up to year 9, year 10, there is no failure in life. Only fail you can do romantically. That's it. And everywhere you are cushioned and you are kind of supported. So how we can, I mean, safetyism is needed, but not that, make us cocooned. How we can do that?
Um, yes, I mean, I recognize very much what you're saying. And let's first tackle this safetyism as needed, right? Because the way I phrase that is that it is important for people to have some emotional security, right? To feel loved, to feel accepted. And that has traditionally been the role of families, but also of whole communities. And of course, the reality is that for many people in the West, communities have gradually been torn apart and are no longer functional. Right? People more and more live alone and live if they live with others, it's in very small families, it's in nuclear families, and they're no longer in touch with their uncles and their aunts and their nieces and their cousins. Now, that may be different for the Indian diaspora living in Melbourne and living in other places. They may still have a strong family community. And in that sense, they may be
But it's
luckier and
decreasing.
richer than many of
That
the
is
West. It's going
decreasing for
down as
sure.
well. It's atomizing. It's being destroyed as well. And that has been a long-term movement in the West, that communities have been destroyed because they don't have a function anymore, right? Or they used to not have a function, 5 and 10 years ago. Their function was taken over by the state. The state said, look, we'll look after you. We'll look after your health. We'll look after your education. We'll look after your policing. We'll look after your accommodation. And we'll build a safety net. And that had great advantages. People were less dependent on their families, and so were less prone to abuse by their families, and it allowed them a great degree of personal freedom. So it was very enticing. But it had a big disadvantage that with the loss of that sort of functional role, families fell apart. Right? People no longer look after their parents and no longer interested in their uncles, their aunts, their cousins. They go off to do something else, which also means that at times that they really need it, they haven't got that support structure anymore. But it's more deeper, right? They no longer have an identity in which they see themselves as part of these warm, strong communities. They are totally dependent on this huge societal system that they don't really understand, but from which everything comes, from which their love life comes, their food comes, their job comes. And then that breeds a high degree of anxiety, a high degree of conformity, and a low degree of resilience, right? They don't know what they have to fall back on. And we've seen in the last couple of years this going drastically wrong, right? When the state behaves well, when governments indeed are sort of largely benevolent, this is fine. But in the lockdowns, in the abuse of the vaccines, and what we're now seeing is the destruction of free speech, which we also see in Australia, right? The recent draconian laws being voted through Parliament just the last 2 days. We basically see that people are caught, right? They haven't got their communities anymore. Practically their families are destroyed, and now suddenly they're facing a powerful state that bosses them around. And well, what is their reaction then? Well, their reaction is, well, let me try and be part of this. Let me try to have a job in this system and boss other people around and sort of have the joys of doing that. But that's not the most intellectually and spiritually nourishing way to be, is it? And we're not, as societies, that doesn't make us strong. So we're now looking at a hopeful future in which there's a rediscovery of communities, of smaller entities than the state as a whole, and larger entities than just the individuals. But how do you get this rediscovery of community? Well, partially it's families which sort of find each other again and sort of start to look after each other. But families are probably too small to do it just within the families. You're probably also going to need these communities, which are thought communities in the case of academics, but maybe caste like other communities when it comes to other professions, right? That you see a regrowth of that. So maybe where we're now going in the West is a rediscovery of community, but then, well, how do you relearn to be a community animal? Well, one of the ways is that this is what schools will then do. They will recreate. They will form new communities out of families that choose to become a community again with other families, and that traditionally has to be about something that you can make money with, and so it'll be sectoral or some sort of role in life, almost caste-like again, right? So maybe what you're now seeing is that the West will become like India. Who knows?
All I can envision is like, okay, we play cricket, we play footy, or we maybe like wine, something like that. Some like a similar interest, kind of, they will create their own caste.
Yes, interest communities are what we've had in the last 5 to 10 years, right? I mean, often on sexuality or that kind of thing, sort of hyper individualize and sort of hyper specialize into what economists call preferences or likes or that kind of thing. You like chess, you like this and that. You have a community you play online. But we've had thousands of years of community formation, and what works in the longer run is something you can have kids with, which means it's not just boys playing on the internet together, no matter how much fun that can be, right? So something you can have kids with, so you need the genders together, and something you can make your money with, right? There has to be an economic basis to these communities. And so the two of those get you more into a profession, an economic role kind of thing, right? So you then get communities where people come together, they form families and they form businesses, right? And they form new structures, if you like, right? And so that's not wine. Unless you're the wine growers, then you can be a community of wine growers. But just the communities of wine consumers, you don't make your money consuming wine. So, you're looking at a different basis for this community formation. And what we're doing at Academia Libera Mentis is basically bringing the thinking families and individuals together and making thought communities out of them, which is, of course, were the academies of many hundred years were, right? They made thinking communities out of them. And what do thinkers do? They teach, they redesign, they can advise, they can become religious leaders, that kind of thing, right? They can set up new businesses, they can sort of show the way, if you like, right? So there are jobs in that direction. And you see these creative, independent thinkers at the top of consultancies, the top of industries, the top also of government. So there is a role, an economic role for these people, right? And we've basically broken away from these mass universities, going back to the essential roots of this kind of small and intimate thing, but we've also put in new elements which were not in the old academies. We're not against modern technology. We try to incorporate modern technology, and use it to do things faster in what technology is good at, things like data, things like programming, things like text checking, things like image making, right? I mean, some of the new techniques are just fantastic. So we do that. And also we're a community incubator with whole families. That didn't used to be what academies did. But of course, academies thousands of years ago were in a situation where there's still very strong small communities and families. And now we're in a situation where that does not exist. And so there's an extra role for us.
You talked about lived experience. How can we bring those people at the front who bring lived experience on the table? Okay, in Australia, especially in mental health, there are like people with lived experience are getting more and more into mainstream integration kind of an opportunity. I mean, work wise, profession wise. In your book also you talked about this lived experience. Please elaborate on that a little bit.
So this is a little bit an extension of what I previously talked about, the parents being in the situation of having to guide their children towards, eating healthy vegetables, and the children being on the other side of that. And both having a valid and interesting perspective that illuminates what's going on and allows you to say, okay, well, if those adolescents, children have children themselves, what would they then do, right? What is the most effective way of helping the next generation adopt good habits? A similar thing is done within our academy when it comes to what happens in large corporations, when it comes to what happens in governments. As much as possible, when we are teaching, we try to connect to whatever experiences there are in the room. So the way you tap into that from a pedagogical point of view is you mainly ask questions, right? You ask, well, has somebody experienced this kind of situation? Have somebody experienced that kind of thing? And as an example, one of the ways in which I try to explain international politics is I ask people, look, in playgrounds you've been part of, schools or wherever, has there always been a bully in the playground? And everybody from their own experience says yes. They say yes, wherever playground they are, there's always a bully. And then I ask them to reflect on that. And the different experiences in the room are sort of fascinating, right? Because people who are 18 often see this purely in negative terms. Say, oh yes, there's always evil there. There's always this and that, and I had to deal with it. But some of the slightly older people say, yes, but the bully toughened me up and made me realize this is what humans are like. And actually, I enjoy being a bully myself, right? You then see that kind of honesty come out, and there are advantages to this, and this is an open space. And then you get the even wider experience of people saying, well, look, if there is always a bully, and if this is also true of international politics, there's always a bully. You have an essential choice. You can be the victim, you can be the bully, or you can be with the bully. Which one of these three would you prefer? And would you prefer to be the victim or the friend of the bully or the bully? And Australia is a wonderful example of a country which has always chosen to be the friends of the bully, right? I
Wow.
mean, Australia was the friend of the UK when the UK was dominant, and switched to be the friend of the US when the US became dominant. And that is still what Australia is. It's the friend of the Americans. And it will be alongside the Americans and go alongside all the wars, whether they make sense or not. And then you can be all moralistic about this and say, oh, that's terrible. Australia should be independent of this. But if there's always a bully, do you really want to be independent of the bully? Because then the other role in the schoolyard, that's victim.
Mm, mm,
And so you get these different perspectives on this issue of human dominance and people trying to press each other. And that is how, as it were, the different experiences really augment each other within that room, right? And they all come to a much richer understanding of this, and they stop being moralistic about it and start to treat it as, yeah, this is a tough one, isn't it? This is a real moral dilemma. And you then get also into these conversations. Well, can we imagine a world in which everybody is nice to each other? And then we get to back. Have you ever seen a schoolyard where people are just nice to each other? And if this is not possible, what does it say about us humans? Are we nice?
no.
Can we be nice? Well, but that's a deep conversation.
Hmm.
And you cannot have those at regular places. You cannot have those in what is now the Mass University, but you can have them with us because that's exactly the conversation you need to be an intellectual leader. You really have to be honest about humanity. That's how we can sort of grow and become communities and become sculptors of our communities, designers of them. You cannot do that with a lie in your heart as to whom you are and who the rest of humanity is. You need to see humanity for whom it really is, and deal with that, right? And we are just not nice, fluffy bunnies. And the perspectives of different people help with that. And so, in that sense, we are tapping into lived experience, as you said.
What are the problem you see as an academy, this left and right wing orthodoxy in education? Like how they limit the thinking process.
Can you explain what you mean by left, right?
Left means everyone is equal. Right means
Yeah.
more conservative, and few will be elite. Rest all will serve that elite group.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. So in that sense, I would say we try not to be political, right? We
Yeah.
try not to say, look, we have a particular ideology. We do have people in the classroom who just want to be powerful, who just want to be rich. To a certain extent, that's fine, right? We accept that. I mean, I am a quite competitive man myself, and so I've made sure that I've made enough money and I have some power, right? And I will not be nasty to other people who want that as well. I see it as a very natural thing for us humans to want. And you have others who are more indeed into wishing everybody to be equal, to have an equal voice. And I have that aspect in me as well. I come from an egalitarian left-wing culture, if you like, right? Um, and so the ethos of the place is this notion of intellectual leadership. There is an aspect of serving within that, right? But that is of those who then choose to, in that sense, adopt that kind of traditional academic role, right? And we would like that. But I've learned you cannot overlay that. If you have people who in their heart just want to be as powerful as possible, you're not going to get that out of them. And there's no point in trying to suppress that in them. That is just whom they are. And it's human, and they have plenty of competition, and good luck or bad luck to them, right? That's their thing. And so we in that sense don't take sides, but as an institution, we do have that traditional academic attitude of service to society, right? That is, as it were, what we personally aim for. And we would like to see that in our students, and that's the kind of students we want to attract. But the reality is that all kinds of people come to you, and once they are there, you just have to deal with them as they are. And so then it makes no sense being too moralistic about it.
Yeah, or wherever they are, at least they can have a honest, open discussion.
Yeah, exactly, 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 exactly.
So
Yes.
everything has its pluses and
And
minuses.
also,
Yes.
people usually don't know who they are, right? They don't know what they actually want most of all because they go along with the stories of their parents and their friends and they move. But to be, as it were, in contact with what you value most is a discovery process for people. Right? They discover over the years, oh, I actually am bothered by this, or I'm not bothered by that, or I secretly want that. Ooh, it's a discovery, right? I don't know if you have experiences like that to share, maybe not online, of discovering who you are, what kind of interactions you enjoy most.
Okay, I will do that. I actually wrote a book, 8 Billion Clients. So we are at the end of our podcast. So as I'm hearing, it's kind of coming in my head that systems fail when they forget about human. Healing and learning require meaning, not just policy, and community matters more than platform. Okay. And this is
Mhm.
what I'm hearing from what you are saying. So what are the hopes we have, what you see? Top three.
I'm very hopeful about humanity in the longer run, right? But I think we're in for a tough time the next 5, 20 years or something like that. And I'm very much trying to be part in that sense of the direction of hope, of the solutions. So what I see as a good way forward for Western societies is to rediscover community, to rediscover honest, resilient, service-oriented small academies. And I would like to see an ecosystem of thousands of small academies, each of, 100, 200 students maximum, a single group of academics, broad thinking. Our curriculum that we've developed could be very useful in that, but I encourage people to make their own, try your own and see if you can do better than ours. And we'll have prediction races. We will, as it were, compete, if you like, right, to home in on the best integrated curriculum that we humans can come up with. But I see a future of thousands of small academies in many different countries. Academies being knowledge centers, being places also where people form new families, they form new businesses, right? They rediscover themselves, the communities, but also this role in life, this role of sort of being able to step back and sort of reimagine their wider societies. And of course, that makes them money, gives them status, but it also would rejuvenate our society as a whole, right? There's part rediscovery in there. There's the rediscovery of the value of free speech, public places where we can really debate and discuss how a society is going and how things can be done better. But I also see these thousands of academies as places where we experiment our way through modern problems like social media addiction, mobile phone addiction, bad food habits, bad gender relations, the sort of the hypersensitivity that people come with. I see these small academies as being very, very useful of experimenting towards solutions. And how do I envisage that? Well, if you've got a community of, let's say, 50 students, including families, they can really negotiate. Okay, well, how about no Wi-Fi for most of the day? Or how about we experiment with this diet for a month and then that diet for a month, and we see, okay, what works for us, right? And so they can take ownership together. And you can't do that on your own. You can't say on your own, oh, I will not be available, for most of the day. Why can't you do that? Because your friends will then organize things. And if you're not available, you won't have friends. You won't be able to even know what events might be going on. And your work will demand of you that you are constantly available. So you can only, as it were, escape that kind of addiction of the internet and social media if you do it with the people who would call you, who are your friends, who are the people you work with, right? And so as a community, you have an opportunity to experiment around modern problems, find solutions, implement them, and then refine them, right? And I see these thousands of academies as it were being solution generators for a lot of our modern problems. Also, how you can make the most out of AI, right? Which is another one of these things, right? How do you do your best in a situation where free speech is under attack, for instance, right? And one of the solutions to that is that, well, those Australians who want to learn what free speech is like, leave Australia for a year, go experience free speech and have communities where that is normal, and then go back to Australia, right? That kind of thing, right? That would be a roundabout way to safeguard, protect, and reintroduce vigorous debate and free speech in Australia.
Right. So on that, we should end our podcast here. Hope you will come back to Australia soon, not like after 10 years. We need people like you in Australia. So thank you, Paul. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful to talk to you, Gautam, and keep up the good work. And thank you very much for giving me this platform.